Hello, I'm Mike Ockamore. This is number 0836, the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0836. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, Humphrey Hawksley, a BBC foreign correspondent and the thriller author of the Reiko Zena series, talks about how sometimes his fiction comes true.
30 years or so I was a foreign correspondent, and I was traveling around hitting crises after crises, and eventually you sort of sit back and say, well, hold on, this has happened in Latin America because this happened in Geneva, and then this is happening in something. And there are these dots that join them all together. And everybody say, oh my God, what's happening here? We have to stop it. What can be done? But actually, if you do the dots leading up to that, you'll say, well, this was bound to happen because a number of dominoes fell into place before it occurred.
Sebastien de Castell, author of The Malevolent Eight. It's the sequel to The Malevolent Seven.
So The Malevolent Eight takes us to a scenario where there are these two very powerful supernatural armies who have been waiting millennia to have their great crusade against each other. They're called the Lords Celestine and the Lords Devilish. And they finally found a battlefield on which they can actually meet and have their war, and that turns out to be the mortal realm. And so Cade and his band of, emotionally broken war mages decide that they're going to stop the war and bring about peace no matter how many people they have to kill.
Stuart Nulman is in with another edition of Book Banter.
Hi, I'm Stuart Nulman, and Book Banter looks at the courageous survival story of Salman Rushdie from a near-fatal assault with his memoir, Night. Be prepared to be inspired later on the Stuff File program.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news, dad joke theater, morning shower thoughts, and an idiot of the day. The guest later, the person who told you that this was show number 0836, was Mike Ockamore, the executive producer of the Pro Bono Group, a company that produces PSAs, including the current Pro Canada PSAs, featuring Canadian celebrities, which are currently running in this very show. He was on show number 0833 discussing the campaign and also his company's PSA journey. Thank you very much, Mike, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. Remember back in the 1990s, this equally exciting and annoying noise? After over 30 years, AOL is discontinuing its iconic dial-up internet service on September the 30th. In a notice posted on its website, the company announced it will be shuttering the dial-up service and associated software, including the AOL Dialer and AOL Shield browser. Oh, I think we finally got the connection.
Welcome.
This change will not affect any other benefits in existing AOL plans. According to a 2023 U.S. Census, over 160,000 people still connect to the internet via dial-up. AOL, formerly known as America Online, was popularized in the 90s as home internet usage grew with its distinctive dial-up tone and, of course, this alert.
You've got mail.
Though AOL merged with Time Warner in 2000 and has since been acquired by Verizon and private equity firm Apollo Global Management, the dial-up service has persisted. But now, after over 3 decades, this once ubiquitous gateway to the early internet will be coming to an end. It's the end of an era. Say goodbye to it.
File's done. Goodbye.
A law firm says United Airlines and Delta Airlines could face federal lawsuits over selling windowless window seats to passengers. The Goloff firm claims the airlines misled customers by offering window seats that don't actually have windows, even though passengers may pay extra for that feature. The firm says this practice could violate airline passenger rights and constitute false advertising. Attorney Casey Olbrands says the firm aims to hold United and Delta accountable for this unfair and misleading business practice. The lawsuits could become class actions, with the firm encouraging affected passengers in California to join. Some passengers have expressed online astonishment over missing windows in their window seats. Alaska Airlines has previously explained this is due to the placement of air conditioning ducts on Boeing 737 aircraft. Wow. Windowless window seats. What's next? No food in-flight meals? Oh, wait. They already have that. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, the Cambridge Dictionary is adding over 6,000 new entries this year as the English language rapidly evolves due to internet culture. According to lexical program manager Colin McIntosh, skibbity, a nonsensical term coined by a YouTuber, is among the new slang words being incorporated. Other planned additions include tradwife, referring to a stay-at-home mother, and delulu, meaning delusional. The dictionary is also recognizing new words spawned by the pandemic, like mouse jiggler, a device used to frame productivity during remote work. Concerns over climate change have also led to the addition of forever chemical, a persistent environmental pollutant. McIntosh says the Cambridge English Corpus, a 2 billion word database, is used to carefully monitor how new vocabulary is being used across different contexts. McIntosh noted, "We only add words where we think they'll have staying power." So, skibbity is in, but still no love for the 1962 song from the Music Man, Shapoopy.
Shapoopy, shapoopy, shapoopy. Shapoopy, shapoopy, shapoopy.
There is no justice. Anyway, let's get to our first guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? We've had Humphrey Hawksley on the show several times before. He's a foreign correspondent for the BBC who is also an espionage thriller writer. He writes the Rake Ozena series of books with titles like Man on Ice, Man on Fire, Man on Edge, and Ice Islands. Humphrey joins us once again via Zoom from London. Hi, Humphrey.
Peter, it is such a pleasure to be back with you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the program. And right off the bat, I have to ask, can you buy me some lotto tickets? Because, you know, what you write in your books seems to be coming true.
Well, you would. What is it they say about terrorism or something? Only one has to come right, and the rest of them you stop. But there is. I think it's because of my, 30 years or so I was a foreign correspondent, and I was traveling around hitting crises after crises. And eventually you sort of sit back and say, well, hold on, this has happened in Latin America because this happened in Geneva, and then this is happening in something. And there are these dots that join them all together. And what we find, and I must say I get a little irritated with, I don't know about what you think, Peter, is that when you read a story in the mainstream press, it doesn't contextualize stuff.
Right.
So what happens suddenly is that Ukraine will burst out, or Gaza will burst out, or something will happen in an obscure place, say Georgia, and everybody say, oh my God, what's happening here? We have to stop it. What can be done? But actually, if you do the dots leading up to that, you'll say, well, this was bound to happen because a number of dominoes fell into place before it occurred.
So it's the equivalent of, before something boils over on the stove, you've got to pay attention to what is cooking, because if you don't pay attention, it will boil over.
Well, let me give you an example that just come to mind. Is the last Rake Ozena thriller series I did was Ice Islands.
Right.
And that was essentially hooked around the political scenario that there has not been a peace treaty between Russia and Japan after the end of the Second World War. They just have a ceasefire like everybody's talking about in Ukraine or like they've got in North Korea. And there is disputed territory there that Russia took as Japan was defeated and all the rest of it. So I constructed a thriller around that with Reiko Zenner saving the world from the from the Third or Fourth World War or whatever it was at the time. But this Alaska meeting between Putin and Trump of a few days back followed an Alaska meeting between the top officials from the Biden administration 3 or 4 years ago in pretty much exactly the same place. Trump and Putin were on the military base, and the China meeting happened to be in a hotel in Anchorage. And what this is showing is the focus, a bigger focus of the world on this area because of the increasing links and the trade and the wealth of Asia and what they call the far north. And I think that what we will see, and this is the first time I've said this because you for some reason you sort of prompt ideas, Peter, what we're going to see in the next few months, I think, whatever unfolds with Ukraine, is something between Russia, China, and the US that is based out in this Far East area. Because it's dangling the carrot of making money, it's dangling the carrot of trade, and it's a place where, unlike Gaza or unlike Ukraine, not many people live. So you can do a lot there under the radar and actually create a whole new sort of strategic center of politics, trade, and of course the military.
Double question here. Because of your background with the BBC as a foreign correspondent and because of your background as an espionage thriller writer, do you think that there are diplomats that kind of use your book as a blueprint?
What I can tell you is this: is that in the US and in North America generally, the military and the strategists take a lot more notice of what thriller writers like myself are writing than they do in Europe. For example, in America, they actually have a book support program or something attached to the military, part of their PR outfit. Because they realize, and when I've hooked up with a couple of these things, they realize that the ideas of the sort of off-the-wall ideas are, come from people like us. They come from Hollywood and they come from fiction writers. The non-fiction strategists, those in uniform, those in government sitting around the table, are kind of boxed in. So if you say something a little wacky in a meeting, you might get frozen out by those who want to keep the status quo or who've got budgets to look after and all that sort of thing. I think what's happened since Donald Trump got in is that everything is wacky. You never quite know where anything's coming from. So maybe the thriller writer's having his heyday and people are taking more notice of us.
And the other part of my last question is, if diplomats use your book as a blueprint, the other side of that question is, has the British government ever decided to or asked you to at least be a diplomat, if not be an ambassador?
No, I think no, they've never asked me to do that. And I think they wouldn't. The British wouldn't do that sort of thing. Interestingly, when I did a book, which we just republished another series of mine, which is called the Future History series, which is led by the Third World War, Dragon Strike, which is about a war in China, and Dragon Fire, which is about India, Pakistan, and China. When Dragon Fire came out, the defense minister of India, George Fernandez of the time, said, I recommend every Indian to read this because it's telling us how war could happen that we have to avoid. And in that respect, I guess I was some kind of diplomat or something like that. And what's interesting, Peter, since that series was published, and we're going back about 20 years now, is that the criteria that leads to conflict hasn't changed. And in my books, as I work through why should India and Pakistan and China fight, or why should China and the US fight? And we're sitting here thinking, well, it's wacky because all our clothes are made in China and our iPhones and all the rest of it. Why should you do that? And when you plot it through in a book, in a sort of military scenario book, you can see exactly why it happens and how it happens, and that you have, as we see in Ukraine now with Zelensky and Putin and Trump and that, you have leaders that are boxed into corners and they don't know how to get out of those corners. And the only way to unbox yourself is with the gun. And now, unfortunately, people are, this whole idea of mutually assured destruction with the nuclear weapon has gone out of the window. And in the Ukraine war and in the Pakistan-India war, nuclear war is being threatened.
It's also interesting, on a sidebar, that the Ukrainian war is going on for so long. I mean, it was a lot longer than people had anticipated because they assumed that Russia would just roll over them very, very quickly. But the fact that it's basically a tank war is almost very old-fashioned.
It's both, actually. Yes, it's very old-fashioned. You get that idea of the First World War trenches, don't you?
Yeah.
And people fighting in forests and ditch by ditch. But also, it's a drone war, and the drones are the very big thing. And the drones are being operated by satellite systems of people sitting, miles and miles away. It's an intelligence war, in that if you're somewhere with an iPhone, you can get picked up and people will know where you are. And it's a I don't know what you call it. It's a sort of special ops ingenious idea war. If you look at some of the things that Ukraine has done to Russia, when they hit the airfields a couple of months ago and blew up the long range bombers. I mean, this is incredible stuff. And I think it's matching the technology with what has to be done. A little bit like when the Special Forces, our SAS in Britain, was created during the Second World War as a sort of undercover desert rats thing that will go in and destroy the airfields.
We're just about out of time, but I wanted to touch base very, very quickly on the republished books that you have that are from 20 years ago. Tell us about that very quickly.
Yeah, so I've got two series. One is a military scenario series, which is the Third World War, Dragon Strike and Dragon Fire. And the republication of the Reiko Zena series is Man on Ice, Man on Fire, Ice Islands, and Man on Edge. And I'm currently writing a fifth one in the Reiko Zena series with the working title of Operation Icebreaker. And that, again, is up in the far north and to do with dodgy Americans, dodgy Europeans, and Reiko Zena cracking through things to try to stop war.
And when is that new one slated to come out?
Well, if I finish it in time, which is by the end of the year, it's slated to come out September next year, 2026. But it involves some research trips to the far north Greenland, so I better get my. Do you want to come with me, Peter? we could. Why don't we go dog sledding up there and wrap ourselves up warm?
No, I think I'll pass on that one.
I'll send you a postcard.
But I would love to have you back on the show when the new one comes out.
Let's do that. Let's make a date.
Absolutely, Humphrey. Thank you very much for taking the time to be on the program with us once again.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, and your questions are great. They really make me think.
Humphrey Hawksley, author of the Reiko Zena series of books with titles like Man on Ice, Man on Fire, Man on Edge, and Ice Islands. It's a pleasure to talk to that man. You can go to our website at thestuffwile.com, check out the show number for this program, which is show number 0836, and you'll find links to Humphrey's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his books directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
And now, Dad Joke Theater.
I tried to start a professional hide-and-seek team, but it didn't work out. Turns out, good players are hard to find.
Join us again for another Stuff File Program, Dad Joke Theater.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like. But the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/thestufffile-program.
I'm standing and speaking out for Canada. Hi, this is Lisa Laflamme. As a reporter, I've seen the world, and it's always made me realize how lucky I am to be a Canadian. That's why whenever possible, my shopping list is a Canadian shopping list to protect Canadian jobs and support Canadian businesses. Shop as if your country depends on it. Keep your money in Canada for Canada.
From the land that brought you maple syrup, poutine, ice hockey, and Pamela Anderson, this is The Stuff File with Peter Anthony Holder.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk to the author of The Malevolent Eight, plus Stuart Nulman is along with another edition of Book Banter. We also have a morning shower thought and an idiot of the day coming your way. But right now, we have much more in Stuff File news right here, right now. The FDA is warning consumers not to eat certain great value raw frozen shrimp sold at Walmart due to a possible cesium-137 contamination. That's right, they're radioactive. U.S. Customs alerted the FDA to the detection of the radioactive isotope in shipping containers at 4 ports. Testing on the shrimp from Indonesian distributor BMS Foods also tested positive. While no contaminated shrimp has entered the food supply, the FDA is recommending a recall of all BMS Foods products shipped after the initial detection. Consumers are advised to discard any matching raw frozen shrimp purchased from Walmart. The FDA says the shrimp violates food safety laws as it appears to have been handled under unsanitary conditions that may have led to cesium-137 contamination. All BMS Foods products are now banned from entering the U.S. until the issue is resolved. Cesium-137 exposure can cause burns, radiation sickness, and even death. You know, refrigerators have lights in them so that when you open them, the light goes on. But there generally isn't any light in the freezer compartment. However, if you open your freezer and you see light coming from it, you may have radioactive shrimp. Yeah. Oh, here's a story of yet another callous, thoughtless tourist. The Arc de Triomphe sits at the top of the Champs-Élysées Avenue in Paris, France. Under the arc is the tomb of the unknown soldier, with a flame honoring the memory of fallen soldiers that's continuously burning since 1923. A tourist was caught on video stooping down, lighting a cigarette, then calmly walking away. The video went viral on social media, and France's Minister for Veterans and Remembrance responded on social media saying, "You cannot ridicule French remembrance and get away with it. This flame does not light a cigarette. It burns for the sacrifice of millions of our soldiers." A 47-year-old Moroccan man was arrested the day after the incident and charged with violating a burial site, tomb, urn, or monument erected in memory of the dead. According to Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau, he was taken into custody and admitted the facts. The man is a legal resident of France, but his residency permit is likely to be revoked. In other words, butt out and get your butt out. Emergency responders in Vernon, Connecticut were called to an unusual rescue situation at a local playground. A 40-year-old man had become wedged inside the middle portion of a tube slide at Northeast Elementary School. The town of Vernon Fire Department, along with Vernon EMS and police, arrived at the scene just after 4:30 p.m. Photographs show the man was stuck feet and head first, with his body folded at the waist. Firefighters set up ventilation equipment to keep the man cool, then removed a section of the slide to reach him. After a 30-minute operation, the patient was successfully freed. He refused any medical treatment or transport to the hospital. While the cause of the incident remains unclear, the fire department's quick response and specialized rescue techniques allowed them to safely extract the man from the confined space of the playground equipment. Okay, I have no idea how he got into this situation where he was doubled over and stuck in an elementary school tube slide, but if he did this all by himself, then this 40-year-old man should be on a list somewhere. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our next guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, McDonald's Japan has stopped selling its latest Happy Sets meal, the Japanese equivalent of our Happy Meals. The Japanese version includes a tiny toy and a Pokemon card. The first day, the burger outlet's entire supply quickly sold out. The company did not consider that a success, though. Collectors were buying the meals in bulk and dumping the food in mounds piled up outside the stores. Now that's shocking in Japan, which does not have a litter problem. The cards were being sold online for tens of thousands of yen. That's hundreds of US dollars. The meals usually cost 510 yen, or $3.40 US. The company said in a statement, "This situation goes against our longtime philosophy that we have cherished as a restaurant to offer a fun dining experience for children and families. We sincerely accept that our preparations had not been adequate." Wow. Leave it to the Japanese culture, where a company who probably prides itself on the preparation of their food literally falls on their swords saying their preparations had not been adequate. I think in that statement, they just devalue the importance of Pokemon. No, not here. Japan. And let's get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? We've had Sebastien de Castell on the show before. Back in 2023, he was touting fantasy novel The Malevolent Seven. Well, here we are 2 years later talking about the sequel, which is called The Malevolent Eight. Sebastien joins us via Zoom from Vancouver. Hi, Sebastien.
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being on the program with us once again. Now, we had extensive chats the last time you were on with us, both before and after the show. So I know we have situations where are very, very similar. We're the youngest of several children. And the one question I didn't ask you at the time is, did being the youngest child form your imagination? And is that partly why you're a writer?
You know, that's a really good question. And, you know, one of the funny things I always say about writing is that talking about, there's an old quote, you know, about talking about whatever is like dancing about architecture. And it's funny because in a way talking about writing is a bit like dancing about architecture in the sense that as a writer, when you're writing, you really have no idea what's going on. Like, you don't know what's causing your brain to do the creative things it needs to do or where it's coming from. And then after you've written a book, of course, and, you know, you start touring a book and you do interviews, you know, a narrative starts to form about where it came from. And so I say all that just as prelude to say, don't trust anything I say about where my creative impulses come from. With that in mind, they definitely come from being the youngest member of a reasonably large number of siblings. And I think that the reason for that, and you and I may have discussed this a little bit last time, is that when you're the youngest, and you have, brothers and sisters that are older than you, it's almost like getting to gaze into the future. Like you're seeing these different, because in a way, there's always a feeling of your siblings as being kind of almost, like different versions of you, or you're a different version of them. And you get to watch them make decisions in their lives. And then you go, okay, well, that's a bad future. I don't want that. Or that's a really good future. And so I think it does kind of like spur you on to it. It almost makes you feel like, there's something practical about imagining the future or imagining different events. And so I think for me that always led to me being somebody who's just constantly creating stories in their head or trying to predict what would happen if this happened or something else happened.
Did you have a great sense of fantasy when you were growing up as a child? Were you very creative that way, imaginative?
So I think I was imaginative, but not creative. And the distinction, of course, being that we all have imaginations and we can all sit and imagine all day long. Being creative means to actually create. And so I was one of those kids, and actually one of those adults for most of my life, who dreamed a lot, but didn't necessarily create a lot, which is why being a novelist is such an amazingly rewarding career, because you get to you create these things and then they're there for you. But I remember, one of the most formative experiences of my life was when I was about 9 years old, or I was maybe a little bit younger, and my older sister, she read to my brother and I The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. And of course, when you're a little kid, in a pretty atheist household, you don't catch the sort of Christian allegories of it at all. It's just a story about swords and magic and this amazing lion who's, everything about decency and honor. And from that moment on, I lived where I lived was a very rural area. You could sort of go into the forest and you were not at all clear that you were still in Canada or on Earth. And so I was just constantly imagining.
Now, we had you on, like I said, for the Malevolent Seven. At the time that you were writing that book, did you know that there was going to be a follow-up, or was this something that happened naturally and you said, well, this particular story is ended, but the saga is not?
So I literally wrote The Malevolent Seven to not be published. It was February of 2020. The lockdowns for COVID had just started. I had just come off a 6-book YA fantasy series that was 2 books a year. So I was delivering a manuscript every 6 months. And I was loving it, and I loved my publishers, and I loved my editors. But just the nature of sort of discourse at the time was such that every time a manuscript was coming back, the language was becoming a little bit more and more policed. And what I mean by that is that just, certain words or terms or turns of phrases that were perfectly fine in book 1, like literally 2 years before, suddenly people were sort of questioning in different ways. And could we just soften this? Could we not use, as many traditional pronouns, like these kinds of things, and which are perfectly reasonable things to do. And nobody was ever censoring my writing, but I was feeling very censored because there was a lot of online discourse about, what people should write about, what fantasy should and shouldn't say and do. And those things, which are perfectly valid forms of public civil discourse, they're important parts of our cultural relationships to one another, are unfortunately toxic to novelists, because you don't want to be thinking about rules when you're writing a novel. And I was in a place where I was like, this is really starting to affect me, my creativity. I'm going to write a book that nobody's going to read. I'm just writing it for myself. I'm going to say every bad thing I want to say. I'm going to put in every dirty joke I want to put in. I'm going to have 12 different magic systems, and I'm not going to explain them. And I'm going to put, whatever the story goes, I'm just doing it because no one's going to read it. When I was finishing the manuscript, my agent at the time said, oh, what have you been working on? I told her I'm just doing this book for myself. As a kind of a palate cleanser, really, just a creative way of creating a separation from the Spellslinger YA books to whatever I was going to do next. And I said, okay, fine. And then she read it and said, oh, I love this. I want to sell it. And I said, forget it. Nobody's going to buy this book. And then she had retired. I had a new agent who said, I've heard of this manuscript, The Malevolent Seven. Can I read it? And I said, sure, you can read it. But, you're not going to want to sell it. And he got back to me and he said, I love this. I want to sell it. And I said, for goodness sake, good luck. If you really want to waste your time, Peter was the fastest book deal I've ever made in my career. And I don't know why, or I didn't know why at the time. But I think it was that fundamentally what I learned writing it is that as long as you're not actually trying to hurt people and you're not trying to make people the target of irreverence or of humor, nobody really minds that much. Nobody's ever complained about the sort of absurd jokes or the violence or the crazy, chaos magic of the Malevolent Seven. That was mostly me assuming the world was trying to censor me. And I think actually there's a tremendous appetite for fantasy that can be dark and gritty, but still have heart to it, and above all, be irreverent. And so that was the origin of Malevolent Seven. And then it became, I still didn't think it was going to sell that well. When you and I last talked, I thought, well, it's turned into a pretty good book. That's nice. But then it became this sort of very rapid sort of hit for me that was surprising. And so the publishers said, do you have ideas for sequels? And I had always known what the start of book 2 would be and what the end of book 3 would be, and nothing in between, but I always knew those things. So when it became popular, I was ready to go to launch into book 2, which is now out as The Malevolent Eight.
So what is the story of The Malevolent Eight? And if you can tell it without giving any spoilers to those who haven't read The Malevolent Seven.
Sure. Yeah, no problem at all. So first, the one thing to know about The Malevolent Seven is it's a band of 7 morally compromised mercenary mages who are called Wonderists in this world. They typically get hired to, help blow up a castle during a siege or, commit some horrible crime on behalf of one group of powerful people against another group of powerful people. But they become in the Malevolent Seven embroiled in a much larger, more dangerous problem for the world. They sort of initially kind of want to stand around and wait for heroes to come and solve the problem. But when no heroes are forthcoming, they realize that even though they're not really the good guys, someone's going to have to step up and do this. And that was kind of a very important moral theme for me about the notion that as human beings, we actually don't just rely on good people to do good things. We need pretty bad people to do good things sometimes too. So the Malevolent Eight takes us to a scenario where there are these 2 very powerful supernatural armies who have been waiting millennia to have their great crusade against each other. They're called the Lords Celestine and the Lords Devilish. And they finally found a battlefield on which they can actually meet and have their war, and that turns out to be the mortal realm. And so Cade and his band of, emotionally broken war mages decide that they're going to stop the war and bring about peace no matter how many people they have to kill.
Wow. Now, the last time we chatted, we also talked about not only your siblings, but your parents. And I understand that your dad was a spy in World War II, and your mother was in the Home Guard during World War II. Have any of their exploits worked its way into your writing?
Mostly what came of it, my mother always told a really interesting story because she was still a teenager when the war first broke out in England. And then she came of age during the war and was part of the I think they called it the Women's Auxiliary or something like that, who were not, of course, allowed to go overseas and fight. They were not supposed to fight at all, but actually she did some anti-aircraft work with them. But the story she told me that always was most profound to me was when she was having to leave London, go to another town, which was something that happened to people all the time. And she was alone, and she was a very young woman, and she was sort of nervous, and a guy came and sat next to her and said, "It's okay, don't worry. You can trust me," kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing that in our narratives today, we usually think, oh, that's a sign of a real dangerous creep and stuff. But my mother would always say, like, even in very difficult situations, you can often trust people. And so that kind of informed some of how I sort of looked at the way people deal with war inside the context of this fantasy novel, that includes, amongst other things, a vampire, dragon, kangaroo. So I don't want my credibility on matters of warfare to be overinflated. But my father, the thing you sort of realize is just from the stories that he told was just sort of how chaotic and fundamentally confused war is, that our notions of being able to predict what's going to happen or what's the right strategy are, I'd almost put it like, planning for war is like dancing about architecture. You know what I mean? Like, you can try it, but it's not always as effective as you'd hope. And I think, if you think about the Russia-Ukraine war that, we've all now been watching for years as the people of Ukraine are, struggling to hold on to their country against a vastly more powerful force, everybody thought that thing was going to be over in 3 days. And also, nobody thought tanks were going to still be part of modern warfare. And yet, that's been very much a tank war in a lot of ways. And so, what I sort of learned from my father and what I sort of brought inside the story of the Malevolent Eight as these sort of 7 anti-heroes are trying to prevent this supernatural war is just how kind of unpredictable the results of the decisions of God's saints and generals are going to be in terms of what actually follows. And so for me, that becomes a really fertile narrative space in which to just have tremendous fun with these sort of irreverent anti-heroes going around blowing things up and swearing constantly as they're trying to bring about peace in every unimaginably bad way possible.
Well, congratulations on the sequel, The Malevolent Eight. I understand that you, by the way, are embarking on quite the tour.
That's right. Yeah. It's funny. It started as I spoke to a mutual friend of ours, my publicist, Mickey Mickelson, and said, hey, I want to just do like a little bit of a Western Canada tour. Do you want to see what you can set up? And then, within weeks, we were suddenly doing a full cross-Canada tour with 20 dates and stops in Seattle in the U.S., as well as New York and New Jersey and Philadelphia. And then South Dakota. And so all of a sudden, I'm about to launch into one of the biggest book tours of my career, certainly in North America. So I'm going to be at, lots of different Chapters Indigos and independent bookstores, and those will be online. I think in Montreal, I'm going to be at Joie de Lire and at Argo Books. And so I'm really hoping to just see as many fans of fantasy as possible and get to know people and have a great time.
Again, the book is The Malevolent Eight, written by Sebastien de Castell. And thank you very much, Sebastien, for being on the program with us once again.
Thank you, Peter.
Sebastien de Castell, author of The Malevolent Eight. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0836, and you'll find links to Sebastien's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. And you can check out his tour dates to find out where he will be appearing near you. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Giving you something to think about. This is Morning Shower Thoughts.
Why is bacon called bacon and cookies called cookies if you cook bacon and bake cookies?
Morning Shower Thoughts from the Stuff File program.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Hey, how would you like to become a patron of the Stuff File program? It's easy to do. By going to patreon.com and becoming a patron, you help to make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. And if you become a regular patron, as a Patreon reward, I'll share with you an electronic version of my book, Great Conversations, my interviews with 2 men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. You've heard me say on many occasions about the myriad of celebrities I've had the chance to talk to that are contained in my book, which is published by Bear Manor Media. You've also heard me mention that some of the celebrities in my book, and many others, can be heard on our page at patreon.com. If you've been on the fence about joining Patreon, let me try to pull you over to our side. Join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, my interviews with 2 men on the moon and a galaxy of stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
From our studios in Montreal, Canada, and going out to the rest of the world, this is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. It's time to crack a spine. The Stuff File presents Book Banter with Stuart Nulman. Once again, here's Peter Anthony Holder.
And this time around, Stuart has a book that, well, it's eye-piercing. Stu?
Literally. Salman Rushdie. I saw him at the Blue Metropolis Literary Festival this past spring, and he did 2 sessions, which played to packed houses, and he has a great sense of humor. If you would have probably told him that remark, he probably would have had a good laugh about it.
I think he would have a good laugh about it only because of the name of his book.
Yeah, it's pretty well to the point, and no pun intended there. But you have to admit, best-selling acclaimed novelist Salman Rushdie is a true survivor. First of all, he survived a fatwa, which is a religious ruling that was issued by the late Iranian leader Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989. It called for his death due to the publication of his controversial novel, The Satanic Verses, which was regarded as an insult to the global Muslim community. And as a result, Rushdie had to go into hiding for years and required round-the-clock security protection. The fatwa was eventually called off and he emerged unscathed. Then came August 12, 2022. As Rushdie was about to start a talk at the Chautauqua Institution in upstate New York, an individual rushed up to the stage and stabbed him several times with a knife. Rushdie suffered serious wounds to his neck, chest, and right eye, which he eventually lost. He was near death, but thanks to the trauma team at the Hamot Hospital in nearby Erie, Pennsylvania, Rushdie survived the near-fatal attack. The assailant, whom Rushdie refers to as, quote-unquote, the A, was overpowered by members of the audience moments after the attack and was immediately arrested. He was tried, convicted, and was recently sentenced to 25 years in prison for his crime. By the way, the topic that Rushdie was going to talk about at Chautauqua was, ironically, the importance of keeping writers safe from harm. So his recovery, both physical and emotional, was a long, arduous one. However, Rushdie found solace with the love and support from his fans, friends, and the medical and literary communities, and not to mention his family, especially his wife Eliza. But writing provided the much-needed therapy for him to come to terms with the attack. Well, this fall, a new collection of short stories is going to be published, but first and foremost came Knife. That's right. That was the name of the memoir, which rose from the incident and is now available in paperback. From there, Rushdie, he takes the reader into a personal journey in the form of a series of meditations to try and understand the assailant's motives, his acceptance of the collateral damages that were brought upon him from those 27 seconds, and how some of his literary contemporaries and inspirations approached the subject of death and survival, and of course his long, sometimes painful road to recovery and rehabilitation. Perhaps the most interesting part of the book is his hypothetical dialogue that he creates between himself and the A about the attack and what motivated the A to take a knife to him on a mission of death. It's a compelling exercise of rationalization and frustration, actually. Now, Knife concludes perfectly with the final chapter, in which Rushdie and Eliza returned to the auditorium at the Chautauqua Institute in September of 2023 and revisited where the attack took place. Its purpose was to get a sense of closure from the events of August 12th, 2022 and the trickle-down effects it caused. The reader gets an insightful journey inside Rushdie's mind as he views the place where he nearly died. Knife is an intelligent, introspective, and cathartic book that shows survival of any kind is an enlightening yet difficult experience. Anyone who has personally survived from any kind of tragedy, ordeal, or setback will find comfort from Rushdie's words and intelligent approach on how he bounced back and dealt with the post-traumatic stress that went with it. Or as he succinctly stated, Peter, and I quote, "Succeed at being functional as a one-eyed man in a two-eyed world," unquote.
Yes. So again, the book is?
It's called Knife by Salman Rushdie. It's published in paperback now by Vintage Canada, and it's $22.
As you said, Salman Rushdie has a great sense of humor, and I would expect, especially considering the way he's written this book, in talking to his assailant, I wouldn't be surprised if he signed a copy and sent it to the jail.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad idea. I wouldn't be surprised if he did something like that.
Yeah. So you like the book?
Yes.
So if you were to do a jacket blurb for the book, would you say it was to the point and sharply written?
I would, but Random House Canada would probably reject it, and Salman would probably love it.
Anyway, what other books would you recommend in this genre, sir?
I would recommend the book that got in that fatwa, courtesy of the Ayatollah, The Satanic Verses, which was published in 1989, and it's readily available. Invest the time in seeing what created such a stir. And also, speaking of survivor stories, I have one that I read and that was really excellent. It was called Unbroken by Lauren Hillenbrand. It's the story of Louis Zamperini, who was a track star, American track star in the 1936 Summer Olympics. and he served in the Air Force. His plane was shot down over the Pacific Ocean. It was a B-24 Liberator bomber. Survived a number of harrowing days afloat on a life raft with two other members of his crew in dangerous shark-infested waters. Got picked up by a boat, but it was a Japanese submarine, and then spent the rest of the war in one of the worst Japanese POW camps that was run by one of the most sadistic POW camp commandants that ever existed in the Pacific Theater. And he lived till his mid-90s, actually, Zamperini. And the book was a huge bestseller and became a movie. There was a movie version as well. But he was a true survivor. Look at what he went through.
Let's go back to Satanic Verses for a moment. In your estimation, how did the fatwa, as horrendous as it was, and it sent Salman Rushdie into hiding, how well do you think the book did because of that?
I remember when the controversy erupted, that there was a run on the bookstores for copies of this book. You couldn't get a copy unless you ordered with the store. There was a real run on this novel.
Wow. Interesting. Anyway, this week's book is
Knife by Salman Rushdie, published by Vintage Canada, and it's $22.
And how can one find you, sir?
Well, maybe one day I'll find my way to Chautauqua, New York, and the Institute. But until then, you could read my stuff, which won't cause any fatwas, I hope not, on my blog, Stuart Nulman's Grapevine, at stuartnulmansgrapevine.wordpress.com, or the beststory.ca website, or go to Substack.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stu.
And thank you, and Salman says thank you too.
I will acknowledge that. Stuart Nulman with another edition of Book Banter here on the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
The Stuff File.
And we're just about a racetrack for this edition of the Stuff File program. We do have an Idiot of the Day coming your way a little later on, but I've got a few more Stuff File news stories to share with you right here, right now. An alleged cryptocurrency scammer's 5 years on the run ended after he was arrested for littering near a train station in Seoul, South Korea. I mentioned earlier that Asian countries really crack down on littering. This is just another case of it. Police said they only intended to arrest the man for throwing a cigarette butt, but they got suspicious when he begged them to let him go just this once and then tried to escape. The man also refused to show his ID, pretended to take a phone call, and offered police money in exchange for letting him go. Upon questioning, police found that he was wanted for allegedly defrauding the equivalent of about $13 million from 1,300 people through a cryptocurrency scam. The man, who is in his 60s, has a standing arrest warrant for 10 charges relating to the alleged cryptocurrency scam, including fraud. He has since been handed over to the Seoul Southern District Prosecutor's Office, which has been leading the investigation against him. Wow, caught because he carelessly tossed a cigarette butt. See, boys and girls, this is the slippery slope of the evils of smoking. Yeah. And still with South Korea, Starbucks locations there are cracking down on customers setting up elaborate workstations in their cafes. The company has posted notices banning the use of desktop computers, printers, power strips, and large partitions. Wow. Customers will also not be allowed to leave belongings unattended for extended periods. This policy targets a group known as Kagonjok, a term combining the Korean words for cafe and study, who spend hours studying or working in the cafes, taking up excessive space. While laptops are still permitted, Starbucks Korea is seeking to address complaints from other customers about these cafe squatters and their extensive setups which have gone viral online. The company says people are welcome to work or study, but must avoid monopolizing the space. Wow, how incredibly entitled and selfish these people must be. Bringing in a full desktop computer and also partitions? Here's an idea. Stay at home and order coffee in. Anyway, boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. This Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
In the state of Washington, a 21-year-old driver was arrested after being caught speeding while on her way to pay a previous speeding ticket. According to the Kennewick Police Department, a traffic officer observed a sedan illegally passing another vehicle in the oncoming lane just after 9 a.m. Radar confirmed the car was traveling at 74 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone. The driver, identified as Jasmine Hernandez, was stopped and arrested for reckless driving. Police said Hernandez admitted that she was on her way to the courthouse to pay for a speeding citation that she received just 17 days earlier. In addition to the reckless driving arrest, she was cited for driving without insurance and operating a vehicle without a valid license. Now, why? Oh, why? Would you be speeding, driving recklessly while passing another vehicle, all while not having a valid license or insurance, all because you want to get to the courthouse to pay a previous speeding ticket from 17 days ago? Which reminds me, why wasn't she cited for not having a license or insurance 17 days ago? Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. Why drive like a maniac to pay a speeding ticket? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0836. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com, and once again, Stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0836. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Mastodon, and Blue Sky as PA Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including kdxradio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WNRHLP-FM in Newport Richey, Florida, KZZHLP-FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. Well, you weren't literally with him. Well, maybe you were, but I don't see how. I mean, he does record these in advance, you know, and okay, maybe you did listen with him. Who am I to call you a liar? And personally, I've never met the guy, and I'm not in a hurry to either.